If you were a drag racer in 1955, the world was your oyster. Just consider power plant options. You could have run the then new for that year small block Chevy. At the other end of the spectrum, the Ford Mercury Flatheads had 23 years of research behind them. The Olds Cadillac overhead valve V8s had been around since 1949 and were powering a lot of winning cars. And don't forget the Hemi. You're still 2 years away from the legendary 392, but that power plant's winning a lot of races at this point. How about body styles? You could have run a stocker, altered, a roadster, a motorcycle, or a dragster. You could have filled the fuel tank with gasoline or alcohol or nitro. You could have run a supercharger, an injector, a carburetor. If it was a dragster, you could have had the engine in front of you. You could have had a rear engine dragster. You could have run a twin engine dragster. There was even a four-wheel drive car in 1955. Back then, tires were small. A 7-inch slick was considered state-of-the-art, and the purses were also pretty small. Top Eliminator would run for typically a savings bond for $25, or maybe a bigger event, it might have been for $50. What wasn't small was breakage back then. Engines, transmissions, clutches, rear gears, axles, it was just rampant, the parts failure that was around. Also, you were limited to single lane timing. They couldn't clock the left and the right lanes. They would only be able to give ET and speed for the car that got to the finish line first. Another big issue back then is I counted at 8 different Southern California tracks back then, 4 distinctly different classifications for the same style of car. In 1955, there was plenty of night racing. There actually was even same-day television coverage. NBC did a special on November 13th from San Fernando racetrack. Racing was all the way across the country. It was rampant, and especially in Southern California. I just picked an arbitrary date, November 27th, where a lot of the nation might have been closed down, but not Southern California. You had drag racing at Saugus, Santa Ana, San Fernando, Colton, Pomona, and Lyons. That's 6 different tracks, and the furthest 2 apart were 90 miles from each other. Huge event that took place in 1955 was the breaking of the 150-mile-an-hour barrier. There was a car called the Bustle Bomb. It was driven by Lloyd Scott, and it did this in Lawrenceville, Illinois, at the World Series of Drag Racing, and it clocked 151 miles an hour. This car was breathtakingly innovative. It ran on gasoline. It had 2 engines. Picture this. A carbureted 348-inch Oldsmobile coupled to a clutch, a 2-speed transmission, a drive shaft, drives into the pinion gear, drives the ring gear. This team of 4 took that center section, split it in half, took another front portion of it with the ring gear, bolted it behind, with the pinion gear, so that 2 pinion gears drove a common ring gear. Now that thing would couple to a 391-inch Cadillac. When Lloyd brought that car to the starting line, the Oldsmobile was running, the Cadillac was shut off. Once he would bring it up and stage the car, he would slide a coupler to engage the Cadillac. It wasn't running yet. He would then turn on the ignition system, flip on electric fuel pumps. And then when he launched the car, as it started to spin the Cadillac over, it would fire up. And that car was equipped with sort of the world's first throttle stop. I'm not quite sure how they did it. It's ingenious. They had a setup on the carburetor linkage where it would slowly open the carburetors to full throttle over a 2-second period. So Lloyd Scott, first one to exceed 150 miles an hour in the quarter mile from a standing start. The second driver to do that took place less than 2 weeks later. It was September 4th at San Fernando, and that was the one and only Mickey Thompson. Completely different car. Single-engined, front-engine car on nitromethane. The third driver to do it, and this is the last one I'm going to mention here, but it's a noteworthy day, was a gentleman named Ed Lasinski, also a front-engine dragster on nitro. He did that October 9th in Long Beach, and that's a big day because Long Beach, and if you caught me earlier when I mentioned the 6 tracks that ran on the same day, that is Lyons Drag Strip. That is arguably the most famous drag strip that ever existed, and that was opening day for Lyons. Another cool thing is October 9th, 1955, third guy going in the 150 mile an hour club, 151 miles an hour, but 45 miles away at San Fernando, Lloyd Scott and the Bustle Bomb one-ups him again. He runs 152 for the new world record there. This, by the way, is on loan to me from Steve Chrisman. This trophy was earned by his father, Jack Chrisman, a Hall of Famer, and it says LADS, Lions Associated Drag Strip from 1959. That's pretty cool. That is also a Jack Chrisman trophy from Santa Ana. If I had to tell you in 1955 who was the superstar of drag racing, I would have to give the nod to Jack Chrisman's nephew, Art Chrisman. By the way, Jack was 1 year older than Art. They're both in the Drag Racing Hall of Fame. Art Chrisman and his number 25 car, which is at the museum at NHRA right now, made the ribbon-cutting opening day run at the first NHRA Nationals at Great Bend on September 29th. Some kind of cool trivia. Other cool stuff happening in 1955. NHRA comes out with their paper. It was only released 3 times that year. It really wasn't targeted for the membership or the fan. It was more to their area advisors and their regional managers to keep them up to speed on stuff. The next year, things would change on that. I'll get into that. The big news on drag race publications for 1955. Starting March 4th, Drag News comes on board. Now, initially, it's bi-weekly. Initially, it only covers 5 Southern California tracks, but it's going to grow. It's going to eventually become weekly. And this is the paper that laid the foundation for much more timely and in-depth coverage of drag racing. You could still read about it in Hot Rod, but that was a monthly and it didn't cover a lot of races. So we're finally getting to the point. Not only is there a ton of stuff happening, but there's great places to read about it. More big changes in store for 1956. Hold on and stay tuned.